The biggest mistake a bully can make is believing a quiet man has nothing left to defend. The first sound that shattered the stillness that morning was not the pounding on my front door. It was the gravel outside my cabin groaning beneath the weight of too many pickup trucks arriving at exactly the same time. I glanced at the old brass clock hanging above my fireplace. 5:42 in the morning. The coffee I had just poured still sent thin curls of steam into the cool mountain air drifting through the open kitchen window. Pine trees swayed gently outside, carrying the clean scent of fresh rain and damp earth across the porch where my father's rocking chair still sat exactly where he had left it years ago. Then came another heavy bang against the front door, strong enough to rattle the picture frames on the wall, but not strong enough to shake my nerves. I remained seated, setting my coffee mug carefully onto the wooden table before reaching for the security monitor beside the window. 14 men stood across my front porch and driveway wearing matching jackets with the Homeowners Association logo stitched across the chest. Some carried clipboards. Others held pry bars and heavy tools meant for construction work. One of them unfolded several sheets of paper and held them toward the door as if waving official authority could somehow create it. Behind them stood Victoria Hayes, the Homeowners Association president, wearing an immaculate white blazer despite the muddy driveway. Her arms folded with the satisfied smile of someone absolutely convinced the morning would end exactly the way she had planned. Through the small speaker connected to my front door camera, I heard a loud voice echo across the porch. "Nathan Brooks, you are being removed from this property under authority of the association." The sentence lingered in the quiet morning air long enough to make me smile. Not because it was funny, but because every single camera around my cabin had just recorded it from 4 different angles. I reached over and pressed another button. My interior cameras activated. My driveway cameras synchronized. My digital recorder displayed green lights across every channel. Outside, another man knocked harder while someone else tried the doorknob. Locked, of course. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with cedar wood filled the room while I calmly opened a weathered leather folder containing the property deed, county survey, and every letter the Homeowners Association had mailed during the previous month. They had threatened fines. They had threatened liens. They had threatened lawsuits. Now they had arrived with 14 people before sunrise, hoping intimidation would accomplish what paperwork never could. What none of them knew was that I had already called the county sheriff's office 30 minutes earlier after my driveway cameras alerted me to unfamiliar vehicles gathering beyond the tree line. Dispatch knew my address. An incident report already existed. Every second unfolding outside my front door was being preserved exactly as it happened. Victoria knocked once more, louder this time, then confidently announced that I had one final chance to leave peacefully. I looked through the monitor directly into her eyes and quietly shook my head. She mistook patience for fear. That happens more often than people realize. They looked at an aging mountain cabin, a retired man living alone, and a silent front door. They never bothered asking why someone who valued peace had prepared so carefully for the day peace might be tested. They believed they had surrounded the wrong homeowner. They had no idea they were standing outside the home of a man who had spent an entire career learning that discipline always outlasts intimidation. 9 days earlier, my mornings followed the same quiet rhythm they had for nearly 6 years. I woke before sunrise, brewed a pot of black coffee in the old enamel pot my father had used, stepped onto the front porch, and listened to the wind moving through the pine trees before the rest of the county even turned on a porch light. My name is Nathan Brooks. I am 42 years old, and after 2 decades of military service, including several years in Force Recon, I learned that real peace is something you build one ordinary morning at a time. Most people imagine military life as loud helicopters, constant movement, and dramatic moments. The truth is that the profession teaches you to appreciate silence more than anything else. Silence lets you notice details. Silence tells you when something is different. That cabin was never just another house sitting on a mountain ridge. My father built it with his own hands after returning from years of working construction across Colorado. Every beam overhead still carried tiny pencil marks where he measured twice before making every cut. The wide front porch looked across 30 acres of forest, wild grass, and a narrow creek that froze every winter. The smell of cedar from the log walls mixed with fresh coffee every morning. And whenever sunlight reached the old American flag beside the porch steps, I could almost hear my father reminding me that ownership came with responsibility, not entitlement. After retiring from the Marine Corps, I could have accepted consulting contracts or private security work that paid far more than I needed. Instead, I chose this place because nobody cared about rank out here. The neighbors knew me as the quiet man who repaired fences after storms, cleared fallen trees from the county road without asking for recognition, and helped elderly residents carry supplies whenever heavy snow closed the highway. Very few people ever asked about the photographs hanging inside my office. The medals stayed inside a wooden cabinet my father built years ago because I had never believed accomplishments needed to decorate a living room wall. Discipline was supposed to shape your character, not become your personality. That quiet life changed the afternoon Willow Ridge Estates elected a new homeowners association president. Her name was Victoria Hayes, and she arrived with polished presentations, expensive suits, and ambitious promises about transforming the neighborhood into what she proudly called the premier mountain community in the county. She spoke confidently about expanding amenities, increasing property values, attracting luxury buyers, and modernizing the area for future growth. Most residents applauded every proposal because it sounded impressive inside the clubhouse with colorful presentation boards and polished charts. I sat near the back beside an elderly rancher who leaned toward me and whispered, "Whenever somebody talks this much about property values, somebody else usually ends up paying the bill." I smiled because experience had taught me the same lesson in different places around the world. Grand plans often ignored ordinary people standing quietly at the edge of the map. At that moment, I still believed my cabin would remain outside the association's attention because my property had existed long before the subdivision. I finished my coffee that evening believing the meeting was simply another neighborhood discussion. Looking back now, I realized that was the last truly peaceful day before someone decided my home had become far more valuable to them than it ever had to me. Over the next several days, Victoria's vision for the neighborhood became much clearer, and it had very little to do with landscaping or community improvements. Every presentation slowly revealed another piece of a much larger plan. The clubhouse would be expanded. A luxury fitness center would be added. A larger parking area would welcome future events. New walking paths would connect every section of Willow Ridge Estates. On paper, it sounded impressive, but every revised map quietly stretched closer to the property line surrounding my cabin. During one board meeting, I noticed something unusual. My land was shaded in the same color as the future expansion area, even though my parcel had never belonged to the homeowners association. I waited until the presentation ended before walking to the display board. "You have included my property inside your concept drawing," I said calmly. Victoria glanced at the map for only a second before smiling. "It is only a preliminary illustration." I pointed toward the survey lines. Illustrations usually do not erase recorded county boundaries. Several people looked at the board more carefully for the first time. Victoria quickly rolled the display closed and assured everyone that final designs would respect all legal requirements. The conversation moved on, but something about the exchange stayed with me. The following afternoon, I drove to the county recorder's office and requested certified copies of every deed, survey, easement, and subdivision filing connected to my land and the neighboring development. The clerk recognized my address immediately and handed me a thick folder. Everything matched exactly what my father had left me years earlier. My cabin, the surrounding acreage, the access driveway, and every recorded boundary remained entirely outside the jurisdiction of the homeowners association. I scanned every page into my computer that evening and stored duplicate copies inside a fire-resistant document safe. Old habits from military service had taught me that preparation is usually invisible until the day it becomes essential. 2 days later, I found the first official letter taped to my mailbox. The envelope carried the homeowners association logo across the top and informed me that my property was expected to comply with newly adopted community appearance standards. I read every line twice before quietly laughing to myself. They were attempting to enforce rules against a property that had never joined their association. I placed the letter inside a binder instead of throwing it away. By the end of the week, another notice arrived, followed by an invitation to attend a disciplinary hearing. Then came an email suggesting that cooperation would benefit everyone involved. Every message sounded more confident than the one before, as though repetition alone could somehow rewrite county records. I never answered with anger. Instead, I documented every envelope, photographed every delivery, and kept detailed notes with dates and times. Some neighbors began stopping by to apologize for the growing tension, explaining that many residents had assumed my cabin would simply become part of the expansion because Victoria spoke about it so confidently during meetings. I thanked them for their honesty, but never blamed them. Most people believe what they are repeatedly told until facts prove otherwise. Standing on my porch one quiet evening, while the setting sun painted the pine trees gold, I realized this was never really about one cabin. It was about whether confidence could replace ownership and whether intimidation could replace the law. I had spent enough years serving my country to know exactly how those questions should be answered, and I intended to let patience, evidence, and the truth answer them instead of my emotions. The letters stopped arriving almost as suddenly as they had begun, and for 2 quiet days I allowed myself to believe someone inside the Homeowners Association had finally compared their demands against the county records. That hope disappeared on Friday afternoon when a dark sport utility vehicle rolled slowly past my mailbox, paused at the end of my driveway, and then continued toward the subdivision without stopping. 20 minutes later, another vehicle did the same thing. Neither driver waved. Neither driver appeared lost. They were studying the property, measuring distances, and convincing themselves I would eventually give in if enough pressure surrounded me. The following morning, I found fresh orange survey flags pushed into the ground several feet inside my side pasture. I walked over carrying my property survey and a measuring tape. Every flag sat well beyond the actual subdivision boundary. I photographed each one before carefully removing them and placing them inside a storage bin in my workshop. By lunchtime, my phone rang. Victoria introduced herself with the same polished confidence she displayed at every board meeting. She said she wanted to resolve the disagreement as neighbors. I told her I appreciated the call and politely asked whether she had reviewed the certified county survey I had previously referenced. A brief silence followed before she replied that the association had its own consultants and did not believe my interpretation reflected the community's future plans. Future plans. I had heard those words often enough to know they usually meant someone wanted tomorrow to erase today's legal reality. I wished her a pleasant afternoon, ended the call, and added a detailed note to my incident log with the exact time, duration, and summary of our conversation. That evening, I installed 2 additional security cameras overlooking the driveway entrance and synchronized every recording device to the same digital time server so every image would carry identical timestamps. Years in the Marines had taught me that small details often decide much larger outcomes. On Sunday, several neighbors stopped by while walking their dogs. They spoke quietly, glancing back toward the subdivision before admitting they had heard rumors that the association intended to reclaim my property for a future clubhouse expansion. One elderly couple even apologized because they had believed those rumors until they saw the county maps I showed them. I thanked them for being honest and explained that disagreements should always be settled with documents instead of assumptions. Before leaving, the husband looked around my porch, noticed the new cameras, and asked if I expected trouble. I smiled politely and answered, I expect preparation to look unnecessary right up until the moment it becomes important. Monday morning, another certified envelope appeared. This one announced a mandatory compliance inspection scheduled for the following weekend. There was no county seal, no court order, and no legal authority attached to the notice. Only the Homeowners Association letterhead and Victoria's signature. I placed it beside the previous letters inside my binder without making a single phone call. Later that afternoon, I visited the county sheriff's office, not to accuse anyone of a crime, but simply to document everything that had happened so far. The deputy at the front desk listened carefully, reviewed copies of my property records, and created an informational incident report in case the situation escalated. As I drove home beneath the fading orange sky, I felt remarkably calm. The Homeowners Association believed they were building a stronger case with every passing day. In reality, they were quietly building mine, one documented decision at a time. Tuesday evening arrived with the kind of quiet that usually settles over the mountains just before sunset. The air smelled of pine needles warming beneath the last rays of daylight, and a gentle breeze carried the distant sound of wind chimes from a neighboring porch. I spent the afternoon repairing a section of split-rail fence near the creek, then returned to the cabin just as the security system sent a notification to my phone. One vehicle had stopped briefly outside my gate before driving away without anyone stepping out. 20 minutes later, another alert appeared. Different truck, same behavior. I opened the camera footage and watched both recordings carefully. Neither driver seemed interested in my house itself. They were studying entrances, parking areas, camera locations, and the width of the driveway. Experience had taught me that people preparing for unnecessary confrontation almost always conducted quiet observations before they acted. Instead of assuming the worst, I simply archived every video clip into a separate evidence folder labeled by date and time. Later that night, my attorney returned my call after reviewing the growing stack of HOA correspondence I had emailed earlier in the week. He told me something that confirmed exactly what I had suspected. None of the notices carried any legal authority beyond the association's internal policies, and because my property had never been annexed into the homeowners association, those policies did not apply to my land. He recommended one simple strategy. Do not argue. Do not threaten. Document everything. I smiled because that had already become my plan from the very beginning. Before ending the call, he suggested notifying the county sheriff's office again if I observed any organized attempt to enter the property without lawful authority. I thanked him, wrote detailed notes from the conversation, and placed them inside the same binder that now held every letter, photograph, email, and survey map connected to the dispute. The following afternoon, another certified envelope appeared inside my mailbox. This notice announced that a compliance team would visit my property before the end of the week to enforce the association's decision if voluntary cooperation was not received. I read every sentence slowly, noticing that the document carefully avoided citing any court order or county authorization. It relied entirely on confident language instead of legal authority. That difference mattered. I scanned the notice, saved digital copies to multiple drives, and then drove into town. At the sheriff's office, I updated the existing incident report, providing copies of the latest letter and the recent security footage showing unfamiliar vehicles repeatedly observing my driveway. The deputy thanked me for documenting everything so thoroughly and assured me that if any situation developed involving property access, previous reports would help establish the complete timeline. Driving home beneath a sky painted orange and purple by the setting sun, I felt the same calm certainty I had carried through countless difficult situations years earlier. Preparation has a strange effect on fear. The more carefully you prepare, the less room fear has to grow. That evening, I tested every exterior camera, replaced backup batteries, synchronized recording timestamps once again, and verified that each device uploaded securely to off-site storage. Before going to bed, I placed my property deed, certified survey, attorney's letter, and county records neatly on the kitchen table where they could be reached within seconds if needed. Outside, the forest settled into complete silence beneath a sky filled with stars. Nothing looked unusual. Nothing sounded threatening. Yet every instinct I had developed over a lifetime told me that the next knock on my front door would not arrive carrying another envelope. It would arrive carrying the consequences of every warning Victoria Hayes had chosen to ignore. At exactly 5:42 the next morning, the quiet mountain air disappeared beneath the sound of truck doors closing one after another. I did not rush toward the window because I already knew what the driveway cameras had detected several minutes earlier. 14 men had arrived together, parking in a neat line along the gravel entrance before walking toward the porch with practiced confidence. Some carried clipboards, while others wore matching jackets displaying the Homeowners Association logo. A few held construction tools that looked completely out of place at a private residence before sunrise. Through the security monitor, I watched Victoria Hayes step onto the porch as though she were hosting a neighborhood event instead of creating one. Her expression carried the certainty of someone who had repeated the same story often enough to believe it herself. She raised a stack of printed papers toward the camera and announced that the association had reached its final decision. According to her, my continued refusal to cooperate left them with no alternative except immediate enforcement. I quietly opened the leather binder resting beside my coffee mug. Inside were certified county deeds, property surveys, copies of every homeowners association letter, my attorney's written response, and the incident report number already assigned by the county sheriff's office. Everything had been prepared long before the first truck entered my driveway. Another loud knock echoed through the cabin, followed by a voice instructing me to come outside and discuss the matter. I remained exactly where I was. Years in Force Recon had taught me that discipline begins with controlling your own decisions instead of reacting to someone else's emotions. Outside, several members of the group began speaking among themselves while glancing toward the cameras mounted beneath the porch roof. One noticed the recording light. Another pointed toward the additional cameras overlooking the driveway and side yard. Their confidence became noticeably quieter. I pressed a button on the security panel, activating two-way audio through the front door camera. "Good morning," I said calmly. "Everything taking place on this property is being recorded. The county sheriff's office already has an active incident report regarding this dispute, and my attorney has copies of every document connected to today's visit." The porch fell silent for several seconds. Victoria recovered first, insisting that the association was simply exercising its authority. I politely asked her to identify the specific county order or court judgment authorizing anyone present to enter property that was legally outside the association's jurisdiction. No one answered immediately. Instead, several people began looking at one another rather than at me. I continued speaking in the same calm tone. "If you believe you have legal authority, please place the signed order in front of the camera so it can be documented." Victoria shuffled through her papers, but never raised one toward the lens. The only documents visible carried the Homeowners Association letterhead I had already archived multiple times. Another member quietly suggested they should wait until legal counsel arrived. Someone else asked whether law enforcement had actually been notified. At that exact moment, another notification appeared on my security monitor showing a marked sheriff's vehicle turning onto the county road leading toward the cabin. I never smiled, never celebrated, and never raised my voice. I simply closed the binder, took one final sip of now lukewarm coffee, and watched as certainty slowly gave way to hesitation on the other side of the door. The difference between confidence and authority is easy to overlook until the law finally arrives to separate the two. The sheriff's vehicle rolled slowly onto the gravel driveway, with its emergency lights flashing quietly instead of blaring through the peaceful mountain morning. The sound alone changed the atmosphere outside my cabin. Conversation stopped. Several members of the group instinctively stepped back from the porch, while others lowered the clipboards they had been holding only moments earlier with complete confidence. Through the security monitor, I watched Deputy Aaron Mitchell step out of his patrol vehicle with the calm, measured professionalism that comes from years of dealing with tense situations without making them worse. He greeted everyone politely before asking a simple question. "Who requested this gathering?" Victoria immediately walked toward him, holding up her stack of association documents and explaining that the Homeowners Association was enforcing community regulations against a non-compliant property owner. The deputy listened without interrupting, then asked another simple question. "Is this property part of your recorded Homeowners Association?" Victoria hesitated before answering that the association believed it should be included because of future development plans. The deputy nodded once, made a brief note in his notebook, and then asked to see the recorded county documents supporting that claim. Once again, silence answered before words did. I opened the front door for the first time that morning, keeping my hands clearly visible while carrying only the leather binder that contained every document I had collected over the previous weeks. The cool mountain air carried the familiar scent of pine and damp earth as I walked onto the porch. Nobody moved toward me. Nobody raised their voice. I greeted the deputy, handed him certified copies of my deed, the county survey, the attorney's written opinion, and the incident report updates I had previously filed. He compared the parcel numbers against the documents Victoria had provided. The difference was immediately obvious. My property appeared nowhere inside the recorded Homeowners Association boundaries. Deputy Mitchell quietly thanked me before speaking to Victoria in the same respectful tone he had used from the moment he arrived. He explained that Homeowners Association rules could not replace recorded county property records, and that private association documents alone did not authorize entry onto land outside the association's jurisdiction. He also reminded everyone present that disputes over property ownership belonged in the courts, not on someone's front porch before sunrise. Several members of the group exchanged uneasy looks. One man removed his association jacket and folded it over his arm. Another quietly admitted he had been told they were simply delivering paperwork, not participating in an attempted enforcement action. The confidence that had filled the driveway only minutes earlier slowly disappeared as people realized they had relied on assumptions instead of verified facts. Victoria attempted one final explanation, insisting that legal counsel had assured her the association's position was strong. The deputy responded calmly that legal opinions could always be presented through proper court proceedings, but until then, recorded county documents remained the controlling authority. He asked the group to leave the property peacefully, and one by one they returned to their vehicles without argument. I stood quietly beside the porch railing, watching the trucks disappear through the trees as the morning sunlight finally reached the front steps. My years in Force Recon had certainly taught me how to stay calm under pressure, but that was never what resolved the situation. The discipline that mattered most was the discipline to prepare, to document every detail, and to trust the legal process instead of emotion. By the time the last truck disappeared beyond the bend in the road, the loudest sound left in the valley was nothing more than the wind moving gently through the pines, exactly the way the morning had begun before arrogance mistook confidence for authority. The story spread through Willow Ridge Estates faster than any official announcement ever could. Before noon, nearly every homeowner had heard some version of what happened outside my cabin that morning, but rumors have a way of changing details with every conversation. Fortunately, rumors were no longer important because the security cameras, the sheriff's incident report, and the county property records all told exactly the same story. 2 days later, the county attorney's office requested copies of every document connected to the dispute. I delivered neatly organized folders containing certified deeds, survey maps, every homeowners association letter, email correspondence, security footage, and the complete incident log I had maintained from the beginning. The attorney reviewing the file paused after flipping through several pages and quietly remarked that very few property owners ever documented events with that level of consistency. I smiled and answered with the same lesson the Marines had reinforced throughout my career. Preparation is easiest before anyone realizes it will become necessary. While the county completed its review, the Homeowners Association scheduled an emergency meeting inside the clubhouse. This time the atmosphere was completely different from the polished presentations that had filled the room only weeks earlier. Residents arrived carrying printed copies of county parcel maps instead of architectural renderings. Questions replaced applause. Homeowners wanted to know why association funds had been spent pursuing property that official records clearly showed was never part of the community. Others asked why volunteers had been encouraged to participate in an early morning enforcement effort without first confirming legal authority. Victoria attempted to reassure everyone that she had relied on professional advice, but confidence alone no longer satisfied the people sitting in those folding chairs. One retired surveyor quietly stood and explained how recorded county boundaries could not be changed through homeowners association votes or conceptual development plans. Several residents nodded as they compared his explanation with the certified maps projected onto the meeting room screen. The facts required no dramatic speeches because every document supported the next. By the end of the evening, the remaining board members voted to suspend Victoria from all association responsibilities, while outside legal counsel reviewed every decision connected to the proposed expansion project. Notices were posted announcing that future infrastructure planning would remain on hold until the county completed its evaluation. Contractors removed temporary survey stakes from the edge of my property, and revised development maps quietly disappeared from the clubhouse bulletin board. A few neighbors stopped by my cabin over the following weekend carrying homemade pies, fresh vegetables from backyard gardens, and sincere apologies for believing stories before verifying facts. I accepted every apology with gratitude because I understood how easily repeated assumptions become accepted as truth. Holding resentment would never repair trust inside a community. Honest conversations might. One afternoon, the elderly rancher who had sat beside me during Victoria's first meeting leaned against my porch railing, looked across the pine trees, and chuckled softly. Turns out those property values were not the most valuable thing around here after all. I laughed with him because he was right. The most valuable thing had always been respect for the law and for one another. As the evening sun settled behind the mountains, casting long golden shadows across my father's old cabin, I realized something else had quietly changed. People were no longer talking about a stubborn homeowner refusing to cooperate. They were talking about why patience, careful records, and simple honesty had protected an entire community from allowing confidence to replace the truth. 1 year later, the cabin looked exactly the way my father had always hoped it would. The porch had been refinished with fresh cedar planks. The split-rail fence followed the gentle curve of the hillside once again, and every morning the first sunlight still reached the old American flag before touching anything else on the property. Some things deserve to remain unchanged because they remind us why they were worth protecting in the first place. The Homeowners Association eventually adopted a completely new board after several members resigned, and the remaining residents voted for leaders who promised transparency instead of ambition. Every future proposal involving roads, boundaries, or neighboring land required certified county verification before a single discussion could move forward. The glossy presentation boards disappeared. Thick binders filled with official records took their place. It was not nearly as exciting, but it was infinitely more responsible. The county attorney's review concluded that my property had always remained completely outside the jurisdiction of the association, exactly as the recorded deeds and surveys had shown from the beginning. My attorney smiled when he called with the final paperwork and jokingly asked whether I planned to frame the official letter. I told him it belonged inside the same document safe as every other record because papers protect rights best when they remain organized instead of displayed. Over the following months, I noticed something unexpected. Neighbors I had barely spoken with before began stopping by simply to introduce themselves. Some wanted advice about understanding their own property records. Others asked how they could verify easements before approving future community projects. We spent afternoons around the old picnic table looking over county maps, drinking coffee, and talking about practical ways to prevent misunderstandings before they ever became disputes. Those conversations accomplished more than any argument ever could. One cool autumn afternoon, Deputy Aaron Mitchell drove up my gravel driveway while finishing a routine patrol through the area. He accepted a fresh cup of coffee, looked across the valley, and quietly said, "Most people think preparation looks excessive until the day they need it." I nodded because those words perfectly described everything that had happened. The cameras had never won the day by themselves. The documents had never won by themselves. My years in Force Recon had never won by themselves. They all mattered because they reflected the same habit of disciplined preparation. People often assume military training is about strength, but the greatest lesson I ever learned was responsibility. You prepare so thoroughly that emotions never have to make important decisions for you. Before leaving, the deputy shook my hand and smiled. "You handled this exactly the way we hope citizens will handle difficult situations." That compliment meant more to me than any courtroom victory ever could have. As the truck disappeared beyond the pines, I settled into my father's old rocking chair with another cup of black coffee and listened to the familiar sound of wind moving through the trees. The valley was quiet again, not because conflict had never arrived, but because truth had finally caught up with it. Looking back, people often ask whether being a former Force Recon Marine was the reason everything ended the way it did. My answer is always the same. The uniform did not protect my home. The law did. The training simply taught me to respect it, prepare for it, and trust it even when others refused to. In the end, the strongest thing I ever did was remain patient while the facts spoke louder than intimidation ever could. Justice never marched through my front door wearing a uniform. It arrived one document, one recording, and one honest decision at a time. Thank you for watching this story. If Nathan Brooks' discipline, patience, and unwavering respect for the law inspired you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with friends who enjoy powerful legal dramas and true stories where preparation overcomes intimidation, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable HOA conflicts, property rights battles, and real-life justice stories. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next story about hidden documents, quiet courage, and ordinary people who refuse to surrender when the facts are on their side. Your support helps us continue bringing these remarkable stories to life, and we cannot wait to share the next one with you. That if you were in Nathan Brooks' position, would you have opened the door and confronted the HOA face to face, or would you have stayed calm, trusted the law, and let the evidence speak for itself? Tell us your choice in the comments and explain why.